Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. You didn't think I was going to let Michael go undefended, did you? Tonight is our follow-up special report to go through some of the massive inconsistencies with Leaving Neverland. Now, when I first watched this episode, this 2-part, 4-hour HBO special, I had never heard of these accusations like I heard in this show. I didn't know who Wade was. I didn't know Wade Robson and James Safechuck. I didn't know anything about these two dudes. Didn't know they existed. I got two hoods on. Gonna have to straighten this out. I'm gonna look like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Now, this thing had just come out when I recorded this, and then, of course, I had to sit on it for like 2 weeks before I pushed it out the door. And so I'm definitely getting some very, I don't know, angry listeners. Only a couple seem like they listened to like 5 minutes of it, and they chimed out, and then they bled all over my page. And, of course, they didn't listen to it, so they sound like morons. It's just a couple of them. But a lot of really nice people coming in, disagreeing, but they really did it in a beautiful way, and they offered videos, and they offered sources. They just wrote paragraphs with beautiful facts. And so, to every single one of you who did that, thank you. You're a Deep Thoughts radio listener. You're absolutely the top quality human being that we seek to join this movement for all the subjects, not just Michael Jackson. So please feel welcome. I appreciate it. I look forward to your mind looking into all the episodes that have nothing to do with Michael Jackson and nothing to do with these acidic subjects. There's a few out there, but for the most part, you should feel nice and comfortable. Hopefully. Pardon my rated M mouth every once in a while. I'm going to try to tone that back just a little bit. I try to tone that back for 2 reasons. One, for the listeners who have kindly asked me, do you really got to cuss that much? There probably will be a couple in every episode, but man, I listened to an episode the other day. There's going to be there is a new episode on the Patreon only page. I tried to do a Matrix Part 2, and I did it, and it has some pretty cool turns in it. But the first half of the video, I don't know what it was. I was feeling really just bouncy with my mouth. And so it's up there as a Patreon-only episode. It will never see the light of day. Michael Jackson, Neverland, Leaving Neverland. Now, in case you're just under a rock, living in a barn, don't care, but you bump into this episode and you're like, hey man, it's 4 a.m, I can't get to sleep. I'm just going to watch this video because I randomly found it. This is about the HBO 2-part series, Part 1 and Part 2, each 2 hours long, where 2 gentlemen accuse Michael Jackson 20 years after the fact, 25 years after the fact, of being a child molester. They claim that, man, Michael was busy. And I guess I can say safely now, unfortunately for them, the Anons of the world that Q would call Anons, they now have dug into this. The attorneys have shown back up. A bunch of people that were in the court cases have shown up and said, there's a bunch of inconsistencies here, and the documentary was made to favor, obviously, these 2 individuals to create a buzz, to create more subscriptions to HBO. And they created a very compelling thing. But it might just be fiction. Again, inlaid with truth. If you knew somebody and you hung out with them 30 years ago, I guess you could say anything after they're dead, especially. They're not alive to defend themselves. But it's just your word against a dead guy's word. And then if you can get one other guy to go with you, because you're both having super financial problems, then man, you have something that's sort of unique. We don't get that all the time. We get people talking about dead people all the time, but we don't always get an uncorroborated, evidence-free accusation against an individual. Michael always said, you're innocent until you're proven guilty, and he never realized how important that methodology that we have created in the United States of America is until he was accused. He was sued all the time for all kinds of different things because an accusation's free. Attorneys who think they're going to extort money out of somebody who's rich, The partners of a law firm will simply get together and just do the math and go, well, he's got tons of money. Let's go after him. All right. We got like a 40% chance of winning. But Jesus, if we win 40%, the law firm makes $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, whatever it is, 50%, maybe even $10 million. Those are pretty decent odds. Unless you fail. When I went out and did the debunking research, there was so much evidence against it. But I want to share with you first something that happened in my personal circles. And it was actually kind of funny. I will tell you, if you ever want to get in competition with me, and I'm aware of this, probably one of the areas you don't want to get in a competition with me, and unless you're autistic, unless you make this part of your exhibition profession, is to casually get in a memory war with me. Telling me that something was one way, that you perceived it as one way, when I perceived it as a different methodology. What am I talking about? When I watched this documentary, I was paying such specific attention to what I was watching. It was utterly painful. Both these guys talk so goddamn slow. They make fucking William Shatner look like a speed talker from those FedEx commercials back in the day. So carefully preparing every single word. Never a continuous shot for any length of time. Cut. It's as if they're stitching it together. It's just like say every word in the dictionary, and the producers will simply figure out how to stitch it together to make you say whatever we think you should say. But I had a close friend of mine who's brilliant. I respect greatly. But this person tried to, she just basically remembered things very different than me. And it was two things that I was criticizing the documentary for. One was the maid that came out and said Michael Jackson had been showering with a boy, and when I first heard it in the 90s, she said that she saw Michael performing oral sex on a boy in a shower. So she changed her story. Then she got busted for lying, and then they looked up her background, and she's got a whole fucking lifestyle of telling lies and manipulating facts to extort money out of situations. She's one of those people. All right. And the other thing was that I watched the whole thing through because I wanted to know if these two guys knew each other. Now, today they really, really, really know each other. And now I have reason to believe they really know each other and that they've really planned this thing out. We're going to get to both sides of the argument a little bit. But in the documentary, the only evidence that these people even knew of each other was that when James saw Wade's 2013 interview, I believe, with the guy that's been thrown out of television, he said that he took the video or recorded the video in some way and showed his wife and said, "This is what happened to me." That is the only time they ever mentioned crossbreeding with each other. In fact, I don't remember Wade ever mentioning James at all. But my friend remembered, my God, they're bosom buddies and they knew each other and it was fully disclosed in the documentary. So I was like, God damn it, I know I'm fucking right. I know I'm right. Apparently this episode is going to have dirty words. So I rewatched the last hour and a half of the second episode to rewind, when the accusations started coming out, when they started flipping their testimonies to say he was touching them, the maid was represented in the documentary by cutting in a news clip that went on TV. At no point, in the second half at least, did they stop that news clip and say, oh, but this chick had to admit she was perjuring herself in a court of law. They never went through her background. And then again, watched all the way to the end to see if they ever mentioned each other. Only James mentioned seeing Wade's testimony on TV, and he used that as a sort of a backhanded way of saying, I'm not going to tell you what he did to me, but if you watch what Wade said, that's what he did to me. Okay. So I was right. But isn't it interesting how when someone believes that this is true, they remember it the way they want to remember it. I just wanted the truth. I mean, for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to start off with the thing that looks suspect to me. The only thing that could be visual evidence to indicate that something was a little strange between Michael and these kids. But I wasn't there. I don't know what tense that these moments were done, but it's the holding hand thing. It seems innocent enough, but then it seems a little kooky. If someone is merely trying to relive their childhood, then I think Michael Jackson's smart enough to look around at other children, especially all the kids he hangs out with. I mean, he was surrounded by, I would say if you said how many little kids were within 50 feet, a 50-foot radius around Michael, individual souls that had been around him his entire life, how many do you think? 10 million kids had walked in a 50-foot circle of him? Not counting the concerts at all. None of those kids are sitting around holding hands. Little boys don't sit around holding hands. I never held hands with my little friends. Only when they, maybe you're praying at some dinner or you're playing some game where you're trying to block people. Red Rover, which I hated that game. So that's the only thing that's a little weird. I mean, seriously. Sleeping over, falling asleep in the same bed. I can find 100 rationales in my head for that. I really can. That's what we did do when I was a kid. Guys would spend the night at my house. We didn't drag out a new bed for my friend. He was like, hey, you sleep on that side of the bed, I'll sleep on this side of the bed. That was it. So I watched a few videos that you guys suggested. Very interesting videos. Took some notes. I'm going to go through them here. Now, we have to say, as we're defending the situation potentially, the people who simply don't want to believe, and they can beautifully articulate how they don't believe and why they wouldn't believe such a thing. That's good that they feel that way. But that's not evidence. That's just your feeling. So as much as you might feel that he's innocent, because these guys are making accusations, and again, if Michael's innocent, it's bad. It's going to be bad for those people. There's a few moments in time where I look at people's behavior, like Joe Biden being a pedophile, and I say, this is a man who doesn't believe in God. And if he's ever going to pray to anything, he needs to pray that there is no God. He needs to bank on the fact that as soon as he dies, that all of his little girl breast touching, all of his rubbing his junk against little girls or even teenage girls while he's swearing in their parents, all those little tricks that he thinks he got away with on camera, on HD cameras, he needs to pray every day that there's no God. Anyone defending him needs to pray there's no God. I got news for you. There's an afterlife. And there are consequences. I've been there. I've been on the edge. And man, it is so beyond your comprehension. the afterlife and how quickly you will lose everything. You will lose all the privilege of being a unique individual. You will lose, a prison cell would seem like you're the richest man on earth. When you cross the other side and you've done some nasty shit in this world, I don't think it's forever. I don't think a finite crime yields an eternity in some sort of hell. I don't believe in fire and brimstone, any of that crap. But you don't need that. It just puts you alone in the universe with nothing, with no one. And you just enjoy it. Maybe you're cold, but you will have no interaction with anything. Your senses that used to be your body will be void. You'll be floating into nothingness and enjoy your time until such time as your creator or those who own the universe think you've learned your lesson. So to Wade and James, you better be telling the truth, because that shit's waiting for you. You don't want to meet the GOD having dragged a guy through the coals like this. But we're going to get into it. I was shocked to find out that Wade Robson dated one of Michael Jackson's nieces. Her name's Brandy Jackson. Beautiful girl. Seems like a sweet girl. They met when he was very, very young. I think it's around 7 that he did this photo shoot with Michael. Could be plus or minus. It'd be less. It'd be either 6 or 7, somewhere in there. He does this photo shoot, and he meets Brandy. And then over time, he begged Michael to set up a little connection there. And of course, his uncle, being a good dude, sets him up. And they maintain a friendship, which then turns into a relationship for 10 years. So let's say he's 7, so he's 17 when it's over. I couldn't quite get the fix on how old she was. She looked like she might be just a little older than him, but then when I look at her today, she looks a little younger than him. Not sure. I suppose I could look everybody up, but I'm just not going to do that. So the documentary completely negates the fact that he had this close relationship with Michael Jackson's niece. It seems like they achieved a romantic relationship because the conclusion of the relationship was Wade cheating on Brandy with, allegedly, Britney Spears. According to her, and she seems like an extremely level-headed person, she didn't have that entitlement. She didn't have that, like, oh my God voice. She was seemed extremely intelligent, extremely genuine. And she said that other people had brought her, pulled her aside and said it's not just her, it's a bunch of other people. And they're strategically people that would, give him an up in his career because he's this very talented choreographer. And supposedly this relationship has been alleged between Wade and Britney Spears, and that supposedly broke off the relationship she had with Justin Timberlake. But in my circles, Justin said that she was one of the stupidest human beings that he had ever met, and that's why he decided to go sleep with other people. We'll never know, and we shouldn't care. But isn't it interesting? Supposedly, there's a situation where Michael Jackson is molesting Wade Robson every single time they got together. Every single time. One of the listeners reported in that Wade said, and it was alleged in the documentary, as backed up by his mother and his sister, that when they first came over, when he was 7 years old, I believe, he stayed there for a while, slept in the bed with his sister and Michael Jackson. Supposedly, hanky-panky's going on with his sister in the bed. And according to the graphic explanations of what occurred, how could the sister not see something happening? I mean, come on. Would you even take a risk? Seriously? But then the second part of the story is that the family had a trip planned to go to the Grand Canyon. They're from Australia, so it's even more intense than just seeing the Grand Canyon if you're a United States citizen. Apparently, when the attorneys for Michael Jackson investigated this allegation of him staying there, he did go with his parents to the Grand Canyon. He didn't stay back with Michael Jackson. That wasn't mentioned in the documentary. He just gets to say whatever he wants to say, and then everyone has to deal with it. James, well, he made a reference to riding on the train at Neverland. And the year that he said that he rode on the train hadn't been installed yet. Oopsie. That seems to be a problem. But let's not get it. I should stop digressing into these other fun facts. But now imagine, you have this relationship with Brandy Jackson. I mean, any person in their sane mind, as long as she is intelligent, which she seemed extremely intelligent in this interview and sweet, if you have this super fascination with the Jackson family, no one wants to admit it, but, I've got friends who are famous who said they've had problems dating because they can't figure out whether the person wants to date them to get the fortune within the family or whether or not they want to simply spread their seed with the family. Like, hey, I have a kid from a famous family. I'm set for life. And by the way, that doesn't work because everybody has attorneys. Doesn't work. They can cut your ass out in 2 seconds. You think you've got a case, you won't have a case. So you better love the person. But now how is it that he's got this romantic relationship eventually with this girl, but her uncle's constantly molesting the kid? And why would an uncle who wants to have the kid as his boyfriend ever participate in setting him up with his niece? Why would that ever occur? It's competition. And how does he have this relationship with this girl for 10 years and never mention it in a documentary? Oh, because it probably would make you doubt the fucking story in the first place, wouldn't it? Now let's just push pause for 1 second. If you're watching a documentary, there is a reason why we call them documentaries. Because they are supposed to be an analog of truth. They are supposed to be the most unbiased, well-represented, double-sided analyses of a particular situation. But now, we're not stupid, right? We know that tons of documentaries are done on history. The victors write the history books. In this particular case, dead men tell no tales. And so you can say whatever you want. So the thing is like, if Wade's telling the truth, why wouldn't Wade say, well, I had this relationship with his niece, and what made it weird was her uncle was molesting me? Why not say that? Why not fully disclose things? It's incredibly important. Now, the other thing that's very interesting, and again, those who want to believe are going to throw this next statement out the door, but it's very interesting that they might do that. I watched a different video. This guy analyzed the video angles. He was able to reconstruct how many different times the camera seemed to be moved, turned off and on, the daylight to nighttime, durations were going on. Furniture would disappear. Furniture would reappear, like entire sofas were installed. And of course, it could take multiple weeks, perhaps months to do some of this stuff. But I mean, seriously, I'm going to tell you right now, having created over 370 shows, 380 shows, if I had a story to tell like this, I'm going to get myself a big fat Cuban. I'm going to turn on this camera and I'm going to tell you my story. And it's never going to change. I mean, the camera angles isn't going to change. Maybe I lose my light. Maybe it's nighttime and I talk so damn long it goes into daytime. But you're going to be able to get the full story from start to finish from me. And, hey, I wasn't Michael Jackson's protege, right? Both these guys were told they were going to be directors like Spielberg. Okay, so you got that level of qualification and you can't sit in front of a camera and take a continuous shot for more than maybe a minute or two? You can't speak fluently? It's the other thing that really bothered me right when I first started the documentary was the talking like this. And, it's not normal. There's something wrong. Speak your mind. Did something happen? Well, just talk. But if you're trying to craft fiction, you're following a script, you're trying to punch words, it's a drama. It's not real. This show's real. Love me or hate me. So one of the things that both of them said was that Michael essentially molested them all over the Neverland Ranch. Every single room, every single corner, on the train, in the theater. I mean, if there was just everywhere. And there's a gentleman that worked for Michael for 18 years. His last name's Sundberg. He worked with Michael in studios, helping to record, setting up the studios, all the AV stuff, the audio-video stuff. Helped design the experiences within the Neverland Ranch. This guy knew the place from the back of his hand. He's a very religious man as well. Within his lifetime, he has actually found a guy in his church community, in his church, that was molesting children. He put the guy away. He flipped on the dude and put him away. And so they asked the guy, they said, look, one of the allegations was that, I can't remember which guy said it. This is not something that's in the documentary that I remember. But it was that these studios had green rooms, nice plush rooms that you can sit and chill out, and you are probably fairly protected from the music. It's just so you can take a phone call, relax, sleep, whatever you got to do. Practice on your part that's about to come up. And, there's a lot of people that record songs in segments, like Buckethead will sit in a green room and practice and practice and practice, and then he goes out and does his miking, and it's all over, right? So they asked this guy, is there enough time in his recording schedule to have these intimate events in a green room? And the guy's like, well, he's like, technically speaking, no one can say for sure whether or not a onesie-twosie thing might have occurred, but he's like, these studios are extremely protected. No one's allowed in unless you have an actual excuse to be there. So you can't just be guests sitting around. Because it's about business, get in, get out. Michael liked being on the stage. I'm not sure how much Michael liked being in the recording studio. I'm just not sure. But it would seem that Michael being in the studio completely by himself is unheard of. You have to have a sound engineer with you, running the boards, recording. If you have any musicians that are participating in the creation of the music, well, they're sitting around waiting if it's their day. So somehow this engineer would be outside and on the main recording booth, and then this sexcapade is happening in the green room. It starts to cut down the likelihood that this is true. There were claims that rooms had beds that didn't have beds. It would have been easy enough for James or Wade or whatever. I think James was the one that really went off about all the different rooms in Neverland, but he could have said, well, we were on the floor. Just had to have it. Just had to do this. If you're going to remember it and you're going to recall it, I'm assuming you remember it the way it occurred. But this dude said, the Sundberg guy said, look, if Michael ever touched a kid, or if I ever saw a child looking distressed or depressed, or, just really changed. They came in one way, and then Michael spent some time with them, and they walked out of the room, and he said, I never saw a kid ever just change and say, look distressed. So he goes, well, if it's happening, then somehow the kids are fine. Not to mean it's okay and all that kind of stuff, but he's like, usually be some traumatic situation there, right? There was another thing with James, and James had said that Michael had called him repeatedly, and off the documentary, he said that, I'm not sure if this is in there exactly the way I'm going to state this, but that Michael's assistants were calling him saying, you got to testify, you got to testify, you got to testify, just harassing and harassing and harassing, and eventually he said, no, I'm not going to testify on your behalf. And then Michael got very angry with him and threatened him, said he had big attorneys and all this other stuff. The problem for Mr. Safechuck in this claim is he had already been dismissed by the judge in the case, stating that Safechuck will never be allowed by the judge to testify. I said there's 2 or 3 videos on this. In fact, some of the people in the in the defense had said, look, he was never going to be allowed to testify. So this excuse, and he goes, Michael knew this, and Michael's defense knew this, and if Michael's asking someone to testify on his behalf, it's because his attorney said, go get that kid. You got to have that kid in the case because he's going to save our ass. He was dismissed. There would be no reason for Michael to ever solicit this kid. Now, maybe if the kid said, look, Michael said, I know you can't testify in court, but you could really do some TV appearances for me, that would have changed the story a little bit. But he didn't make that statement. He said that Michael said, you got to be in the case. So that doesn't add up. Sorry. One of these guys, Steve Ross from the defense, said that Wade was cross-examined by 3 of the best attorneys in the world, in that area of the world, that they had notorious backgrounds of being able to break a witness, and that when Wade was on the side of Michael, that they were unable to get him to break any of his storylines. He was always consistent. Everything he said, no matter how many times they asked him, he got all of his facts right, which is why Michael was acquitted on 14 different charges, which is really strange because I see 14 in one area, I see 10 in another. The video outside, I think said 10, but when they tallied it all up, I guess there were 4 other charges somehow. Maybe they're counting the 93 stuff. I don't know. Now here's what's interesting. So Wade is able to tell this Michael didn't touch me story as many times and from as many different perspectives as he possibly can with these 3 cross-examining attorneys, and he never breaks his story. I mean, they never find any inconsistencies in the guy. And anyone who has inconsistencies and can't remember things, they're not the lead witness for the defense. Because as the Scott Ross guy said, he said, look, by the time the defense gets a chance to talk, the prosecution's already finished with their presentation besides closing arguments, And so he goes, they've already convinced the jury, potentially, of the guilt of the defendant. And so the defense is going to bring on their key witness, their top dog, the one that can survive all the cross-examination, get their story straight. Now, isn't it weird that Wade Robson can get all that right? Michael didn't touch me. Every single fact of where he was, when, how, what, where, he gets that correct. But the second he starts saying that Michael touched him, now his story starts to change constantly. Both guys have changed their stories. They have to for a lot of reasons because, again, James saying he rode on a train that didn't exist, whoopsie, your credibility starts to go down the tubes. Then Michael Jackson's nephew is interviewed. I don't want to say his name wrong. I think it's Ty or Tay. It's like T-A-J Jackson. Looks like a nice kid. He grew up with Michael in his life, and a lot of the behavior that Michael exhibited with these kids that has hard evidence, fax machine notes and that kind of thing, Michael did with them as well. And so the nephew made a really good point. He said, look, taken out of context, looking at those faxes and just seeing just Wade's faxes, just James's faxes, makes it look strange. But when you see our faxes, he's saying the same thing to us, and we're his relatives. And we know nothing happened to us. Michael liked to use the word doo-doo. He was Uncle Doo-doo. Whatever that is. My father had 1,000 pet names for himself and me, and I couldn't repeat any of them on this show without potentially angering you guys who are the thought police on language. So it's his innocent way of giving himself a little nickname. Now, he would call at least one of the 2 guys, doo-doo. It's just like a nice way to say, something that, okay, so I'll share one with you. So when my father saw the movie The Jerk by Steve Martin, there was a funny scene in the movie where a dog, it's this reenactment. Steve Martin is staying in this hotel or motel, and the dog comes up and starts barking, and he's seen like Old Yeller or something. He's all, "What is the dog? What? There's a fire? The place is on fire!" And he starts going, "Everybody get out! It's a fire!" And so he creates this huge chaotic situation. There wasn't a fire, and so he ends up adopting the dog. And this guy walks up to him and says, "Is this your dog?" And he says, "Yeah." And he goes, I'm calling him, like, I forgot what he was calling them. I think I'm going to call him like Lifesaver or something like that. And the guy looks at him and he says, "You should call him Shithead, because he made this event occur and we're all outside and we didn't, you just pulled the fire alarm for no reason." And so he goes, "Okay, come here, Shithead," and he starts calling the dog Shithead. So my father thought it was, he would call a shithead every once in a while because of that funny line. So we're all thinking about the jerk. We're not actually feeling like our parent is calling us, a dirty word. So when I see Michael Jackson using doo-doo, I see a guy using the same sort of thought process, but he's a good dude, so he doesn't use dirty words with a child. That's all I get out of that. But the nephew made a good point. He showed countless letters and stuff where all this language that was in the faxes to these kids were being used with him. But he also showed the human element of Michael to say, everyone overlooks the fact that these faxes also had inspirational messages. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. The world is yours. You just got to work hard for it. I mean, even one of the letters, he said, "Please rehearse," to one of his nephews. That's cool, right? Don't I do my own version of that on the show? So what I didn't know about these two gentlemen was the financial problems that both these families are having. The Robson family and the Safechuck family. Now, Wade, I can't say it was an easy come, easy go sort of thing, because Wade, I think, factually can be proven to have worked extremely hard to become a choreographer. And he was a dancer from the age of like 2. By the time he was 5, he was amazing. And by the time he was 7, he was dancing on stage with Michael Jackson. He had that whole Michael Jackson thing down. And then he invented his own style of dancing, which you don't get to be the choreographer for Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake's NSYNC band without having some serious skills. So, yeah, the guy can dance, man. He's not an ugly dude, so it all comes together. He's doing well. But he's burning the candle from both sides. This was, what I'm about to mention, wasn't mentioned in the documentary. And that there was this opportunity in 2011 for Wade Robson to audition for the Michael Jackson Cirque du Soleil event that was going to occur. I think it's a Vegas show. He had written a letter to Cirque du Soleil saying, "Look, this is a dream of mine. I wanted to do this forever. I know Michael Jackson, so we have some resources here." And he basically put together a really good letter just stating why he wanted to do this show. I mean, hats off to the dude. You got to do what you got to do. But he took interviews and said he got the gig when he didn't have the gig, according to these later documents. It was later given to another guy. So another dude got the gig. He didn't get it. Well, the whole thing is portrayed in the documentary as if he did get it. Strange. He said he had Michael come and talk to the Cirque du Soleil people, so I'm a little confused. It's a fact in Wikipedia, he did not produce this show. But it was never portrayed in the documentary that way. People have dug into Wade's life. Recently, I saw a whole documentary, I think produced, I don't know if it's produced out of England, but it's got a British woman's voice on it. And they analyzed his whole financial situation, including the fact that he had just recently sold a house for like $830,000. Supposedly, he's unable to get, the kind of work he used to get. Again, you get into those industries, you're going to be hot for a while, and if you don't reinvent yourself, it doesn't even matter if you reinvent yourself. I don't know how many shows have a bunch of dancers on stage anymore. J-Lo's got her gig, and Britney has her gig, but Britney's on and off here and there. And, as Britney, I mean, would you really keep a guy, the same choreographer, for 10, 20 years? No. You get new choreographers because you need a new method of dancing that breathes life into your routine. Either that or Wade would have to prove that he has completely reinvented himself, and if he creates a second, third, fourth, fifth show, it's going to look completely different than the first couple tours that he worked on. I just don't think the boy band thing is out there anymore like it used to be. So his skill set is unfortunately, perhaps, maybe not in as much demand. And so he's dealing with the life that we talk about on this show a lot. You can be on top, and then you can be on bottom. Now, they did mention the fact that a lawsuit had been brought up against the Jackson estate, and that it was lost due to the fact that California State, I think I loosely mentioned this, but California State has a 4-year pedophile statute of limitations, which is insane. So there's one amount of money that the Wade Robson legal team is going for with the Jackson family estate. And then they notified, according to these videos online, that, flash up the court cases, that that James joined Wade's lawsuit against the family. The whole thing was thrown out of court because of the statute of limitations. If they're telling the truth, it's an injustice for them. But again, there's certainly a lot of holes in the story now. The nephew talks about the sister of Wade, who, when you watch the documentary, her tears are extremely believable. And again, when I say you have to act to a certain degree to get someone like me to believe you, there was a guy that the guy that actually picked apart the camera angles. He was very flippant about the fact that people can be coached to act, and I think that Wade could be coached to act, and I think that maybe James could be coached to act because he was an actor. But their mothers and their sisters and their brothers, that's a different game. The methodology that you typically do is, if you're a technical actor, then you have an amazing command of the human body. There's certain tricks. Hyperventilating can make you make your eyes water a little bit. Then you're kind of weird because you're all, riled up. Method acting is to think of something else that makes you cry. Wade's father hung himself. I'm willing to bet that if you needed to go somewhere, you could go there. It's a horrible thing that happened, and, I think we all wish if we could send him some correctional love, that would be where we would change his life story and keep his dad alive, It's not a joke. It's not something we should flippantly disrespect, in my opinion, regardless of what these guys are saying and whether they're telling the truth or not. They have now gone into the Safechuck family, and I guess the Safechuck family, this is something that's not in the documentary. I can kind of understand why it's not in the documentary, but I guess the family was in the waste business. They were in the trash business, and somehow they had some royalty that they got. They were with a, it's called Sisu something or other waste, and there was some payments that were coming to them, and by 2000, I think even like a 10 or 11 or somewhere in there, they were notified they weren't going to make any more money. And so the family, who had their house purchased and loaned to them, the bank loan came to them by Michael Jackson. In the documentary, they say that the loan was simply forgiven out of thin air after they testified on behalf of Michael Jackson and I believe the 2005 trial. Sort of as a reward. They got bought off. The other documentation on the outside claims, okay, I haven't seen this personally, and they weren't able to provide the actual legal back and forth, so this may or may not be true, but the claim was that Michael's estate was continuing to ask for payments, and the family simply revealed this trash business going south and the fact they weren't going to make any more royalty payments, we're not going to receive any more income from this business that supposedly they helped build. And so Michael just simply, after asking for the money several times, just gave up the loan and said, well, whatever, you can just keep it. So if that side of the story is true, then Michael's a really good guy giving away a house. Now, I have been to, let's see how I say this. Like I said in the previous episode, I got friends that have worked with him a couple times. I also went to Thomas Dolby's private concerts he gave it inside the Grammy facilities in LA. Love that guy. He's a brilliant dude. But he has some pretty interesting anecdotes as well about just the financial shortcomings of the Michael Jackson estate, in that Michael would want to buy things and get things from people, and that it wasn't uncommon for those payments to never be made. And it could be just the problem could just be as simple as Michael meets you in public and goes, hey, yeah, I'll give you $10,000. And he walks off and he never gives it to you. Then you seek the money from the estate, and they're like, we don't know you. We don't know that you're telling the truth. And we're not going to stop Michael from touring to ask him if they met a complete stranger to say, did you really offer someone $10,000, and was this their name? And did they look like this? Was it in, Minnesota or wherever it happened? I can tell you by hanging out with various, just not even like massive celebrities, but just average celebrities. I don't even know how you can say that, but like they're not household names. People pay for things. Like I said, I forgot to mention, as I hung out with rockers in my lifetime, I've been with, very famous lead singers, and we're hanging out in like a nightclub in Vegas, and they're right there and I'm here and there's no one else here. And we're having this conversation, and dudes will just walk in and, kneel down and, hey, Mr. So-and-so, I really, you're a big inspiration. Well, I love your work. And they'll pull out this roll of like $100 bills, like the old fashioned 50s game that they used to play when I was a kid. I mean, I didn't live in the 50s, but that kind of game went on for, a long time. And I watched this happen. Can I get you a drink? And they want to be able to say, I bought so-and-so a drink. That's all they want to do. So I've seen this personally several times. And so you get acclimated to the fact that I don't have to pay for anything. So you never go to the ATM. You never ask your assistant for any cash. You don't even worry about it, because wherever you go, someone wants to buy you dinner. Michael Jackson was here on this patio. I'd say, dude, I'll buy you dinner. It won't be that good, but I'll buy you one, Judging for everything we've heard, he'd be satisfied. So Wade and James seem to be in financial troubles. Wade kind of banked his career on becoming a movie director, because Michael told both of them, you're going to be a big director, Steven Spielberg level, which I just think is so funny. It's like, oh, really? You're, God bless you, man. But James, that statement is ridiculous. Steven Spielberg is, there's a bunch of accusations against him right now, which we won't go into, and I hope they're not true. But seriously, that dude was a prodigy of prodigies. If you were Steven Spielberg, you wouldn't need Michael Jackson for anything. You would be a little Kubrick, and you go off and make a great, host of movies. You would find great scripts, great books, and you'd just be turning them into movies left and right. You would not need any help whatsoever if you potentially had the gene pool to be considered in that camp of, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Ridley Scott, those huge directors that owned the 80s. James Cameron. Did James Cameron need Michael Jackson? No. Did these people get help? Yeah, sure. But they brought the goods too. So I'm sure he made money from all their performances. They don't air those Pepsi commercials anymore, so he's not making any money from that. But they just got paid for this documentary, supposedly, right? So the motive to make money, to save a family, is huge. Someone, insinuated that when the Safechucks found out that they weren't going to make money off of their trash company that they might have come to their son for a loan. But now this is quite a long time ago. They're talking about 9 years ago. This stuff fell through. So who knows? Now, the other thing is that the integrity of the cases that went up against Michael and actually got money out of him are rather important. And it was this Jordy Chandler, the father of Jordy Chandler. This was the dude who left the voicemails all over his attorney's voicemail systems back in the 90s. These are the kind that if you had a machine in your house and someone called your house and left a voicemail, the whole house could hear the message. How crazy is that? The idea was that you could hear the call and then run over to the phone. You could screen your calls, basically. Is this someone I want to talk to? That kind of thing. But that guy left a voicemail that said, I'm going to take down Michael Jackson. He specifically said that he hired the nastiest attorney in the world, and this guy was going to so destroy Michael Jackson if he didn't pay that he wouldn't be able to sell another record. Wow. This was the guy that when I was driving home in the Bay Area, San Francisco area, 1993, I remember I had a 30-minute commute home, which I hated. I just remember that. I remember exactly where I was on the 280. And I heard this guy say, I know he didn't touch my kid, but don't you think it's worth $20 million? The guy, in my categorization, is a scumbag. These voicemails perfectly document someone who was out to get money, to extort out of a fictional story. Then they said, well, Michael settled the case, and so he's guilty. He decided to pay the kid off instead of going through court. Well, there's a technicality there that I personally experienced in my lifetime. When I was 18 years old, I was extremely successful. I bought a brand new car with my own money. My parents would not co-sign because they showed so much trust in me that they wouldn't co-sign my loan. Here they are. They don't have to pay for my college. They don't have to help me out in California, and they wouldn't co-sign a loan because they said, oh, you're just going to go tits up on this loan. Thanks, Mom and Dad. So I bought this thing myself. Got screwed on my interest rates, trust me. 18-year-old kid buying a brand new car. All right. Driving home. Another 18-year-old kid behind me, test driving a car. Why was he test driving a car? Because he had hit someone 6 months earlier and totaled his car. And so he was poking around. It was an old 76 Challenger. He's poking around on the 118. I'm going home. He's barely going the speed limit. And so I'm like, man, I got to get around this guy. This is driving me nuts. So I just dropped that thing into fifth gear. Turbo went on. Got around him. But now he starts racing me on the pass. And I'm looking over. I can't even believe it. He's in my blind spot. I looked over, and so I just punched a little bit, got around the guy, no problem. But now we're going faster than we should. Not even sure how fast that was going. But I look up, and there's this idiot on the highway in the middle of the night. One of the most dangerous highways is the 118 in California. 23 Topanga is worse, but this is the next worst thing. It's like up and down, up and down, up and down. So your viewability is really bad. This guy is stopped on the highway, letting some field workers who had worked some really late shift get in their car, and they were driving onto the highway. So the guy stops. So I'm looking up, and I'm looking at a car halted. And so I'm like, oh my God. So I managed to hit the brakes perfectly, did my own little ABS impersonation, didn't hit the guy in front of me. I was fine. But look in the rearview mirror. Here comes douchebag in his car, 18. I just see headlights going left, right, left, right. The guy's lost complete control of this car. He doesn't even own the car. He manages to swerve away from me instead of hitting me. Thank God. He probably would have killed me. Hits my left rear quarter panel, goes across the street, hits a little dirt embankment, flips the car upside down. So I'm driving next to this guy, and his car is upside down, just like a Hollywood movie. Dirt's flying everywhere. Lands on the top of the car. Gasoline is just gushing out of this dude's car. It's like a movie. For some reason, the guy in the back seat and the guy in the passenger seat had managed to get out instantaneously. And the dude in the driver's seat, his side's a little more collapsed. And so he's hauling ass. He's trying to get out of the car. I'm thinking this thing's going to explode. I got gasoline just gushing out of this freaking locked gas cap that just wasn't doing its job, you know. So it's clearly this dude's fault behind me. Of course, the cops show up and they split us apart. And I'm start chewing this kid out immediately. We're both 18. I'm just like, what the F were you doing? Passing me on the turn. Jesus. And passing me on the, racing me on the pass, excuse me. And he's like, oh my God, my dad's going to kill me. My dad's going to kill me is all I can say. Because he just totaled 2 cars in 6 months. He is a shitty driver. So that night he apologized, claimed responsibility for the accident. We go home. Next day, I call him up. He's playing stupid. I don't know what you're talking about, man. I'm like, oh, here we go. My insurance company paid that asshole $10,000 because whatever. His attorney was, his father hired an attorney. I mean, they must have just barely paid off this attorney. The guy questioned me for 50 minutes in front of my attorney from my insurance company. And I thought we won it. My attorney came out and he's like, dude, you held that guy off like no one I've ever seen. You're only 18 years old. And this guy, he's usually done with guys in 10 minutes. He took you an hour. I said, well, did I say anything wrong? He said, not that I know of. I said, great. So we're clean, right? Yep. Mm-mm. Boom. Paid the kid off. Got a brand new car for being a douchebag. Wasn't my fault. But now that went on my record. Same thing with Michael Jackson. He had an insurance company that the policy qualified for coverage of this exact type, an accusation of this exact type. So they didn't want to fight it. Michael was told personally that the case was going to take 7 years in court and up to 2 or 3 different law firms to handle this at several $1 million a month. Okay. Maybe it was a year. But they chose to pay the kid off. Now, I've heard just all over the camp of what the Chandler family made. So I don't know if we can trust any of the numbers that are out there. I've heard as low as 10. I've heard as high as 23. Michael said it wasn't anything that was printed in the tabloids. Maybe one of you know how much they actually got paid, but I don't know how that would be the case because it's supposed to be private, right? One of the families that accused him, I don't remember exactly the last name, I probably shouldn't even say. One of them, the family, had a huge history of a mother that coerced her sons into extorting money out of people, getting money out of people, including them coming home from school, and she had a bunch of Post-its all over the table of things that you say to get closer to people, so you pull on their heartstrings, so you get a little bit of money here and there. Faking affection to people, so they would eventually give you a 5 here, 10 there, 20 there. So the family had a massive history of deception. Of course they extorted Michael. It's the game. It's the game they play. Now, there's a lot of videos out there that simply pick apart every single thing that Wade and James have said after they turned against Michael. And again, what is fascinating is that their stories change and change and change. Sometimes drastically, sometimes just a little bit. But again, when they were telling the truth about all of their encounters with Michael, they knew exactly where they were, how long they were there, and their stories never interfered with the evidence that was in discovery. The other thing we have to remember is that maybe Michael was tipped off, potentially, but Michael was grabbed in the middle of the night. Neverland Ranch was absolutely scoured. Every building, every closet, everything was examined. All of his magazines, all of his videos, all this stuff. And, he was interviewed with his wife at the time, Presley, the daughter of Elvis, and, you can see that she's backing him up because, she's not going to back the dude up if it's going to make her look like crap eventually. But she just kept, they both of them said, look, there's nothing that's come out of any of this investigation. Michael's body was completely photographed. Supposedly there was moles on his body in this particular place that the kids had said was, in his genital region, and none of that locked in. If any of that had locked in, I think he would have lost those cases with the jury in his 2005 trial. Now, let's back up. Back to the documentary. What are the most convincing elements of the documentary, and what are the more suspect elements of the documentary? Well, the people that have analyzed this documentary over and over and over, their big thing is to say, look, when they're just recalling their time with Michael before any allegations of wrongdoing, it's pretty much just a movie. There's a bunch of pictures of them together, a bunch of, faxes that are shown or whatever pieces of physical evidence that they have. But the second they traverse this moment of starting to accuse Michael of all these different things, there's no evidence. It's just two guys talking. When you go back again to the claims of where they were and when they were, there's a girlfriend missing for 10 years out of the documentary. Would that be important? There's also a book, and I can't pronounce the last guy's name, but there's a fictional book written about the Jordan Chandler son, written by this guy Victor something or other, starts with a G. And he wrote this weird book claiming to know what happened with this kid, this Jordan kid. And what's interesting about it is that James Safechuck, the second kid, his court filing against Michael Jackson, which led to this billion-dollar case that he went in on Wade with, over and over and over, there's all these consistencies, these weird consistencies between what's in this book and what's in James's case. The Chandler family, who sued and got money from the insurance company on Michael Jackson's side, disowned the book and disowned the events that were portrayed in the book between the child, Jordan, and Michael Jackson. Now, I don't know why they would do that. They won in court. Why not say, oh, well, yeah, he even reviewed my son, or he took the court filing that we filed and he just wrote a book about it. But it seems that maybe, James's legal team said, man, this is great. It's the 50 Shades of Grey of a fictional story of Michael Jackson molesting kids, and we're just going to poach it. Very specific things about jealousy and serving alcohol to kids. And what's interesting about it is that Wade said in the documentary, in the second half of the second show, that he had never seen Michael drink alcohol. And when Michael came over in his later years after being married and what have you, and having the three children that he had, that he was saying, bring some wine. And he said, man, I got excited because I thought maybe I'd get a chance to sit down with Michael and have a man-on-man conversation just about life and things. And we'd sit and chill and drink red wine. And, of course, he said that Michael was just pouring, gigantic red cups of red wine and just, downing it, which is, we don't chug wine. It's way too powerful to chug, right? Unless you're Sacha Cohen playing a fictional character, and it's funny. But according to all these accusations, Michael Jackson's feeding kids wine. Why didn't Wade say, well, the wine came back, right? The wine came back into the situation. So again, all the accusations lack any super hard facts. We got a maid who's perjured herself in court. Someone later heard that she said that Michael Jackson threatened her life. I sat and rewatched the whole second half of the documentary where all the accusations came out. I didn't see any of that. I just saw a newsreel that was put in there. And saying you've been threatened is ridiculous. I mean, what, is Michael having people bumped off like the Clintons? No. So you go in and you say what you got to say. And you don't perjure yourself. And you never change your story. Were they going to kill you? Were they going to sue you when you're telling the truth? I mean, seriously? There's no repercussions for telling the truth in this particular scenario because he's not a gangster. The fact that Wade and James are still alive is proof that nothing happens to you after you say these things, even if you're lying. Now, the other two characters I mentioned, and I mentioned this in the first version of the show, and this is where you get into, probably not it's hard to say. So, Macaulay Culkin has just kept his story straight. Dude never touched me. Spent tons of time together. That's it. Done. With Corey Feldman, he said, look, Michael never touched me. Michael always insisted on a cot. It frustrated him because he said he wanted Michael to sleep next to him. Michael's his hero. Michael could do no wrong. But Michael always insisted on a cot. Well, that doesn't sound like a guy who is serial molesting 2 other kids in the world, plus the other 2 that, got dragged through this whole thing as well. But Feldman said that Michael showed him like nudie magazines at one point. And he said, I didn't think anything of it. It's like 2 guys seeing something. And then, when he got older, had a kid of his own, he's like, then I started realizing how screwed up that was because the guy was so much older. Can't really disagree. But having grown up in the Midwest, having, like I said, times were different and we all lived from some of the non-molestation things. It was like, if you saw a nudie mag when I was a kid, it belonged to an adult. How the hell do you think these things could, get into our hands? We're going to walk into a porn shop. Yeah, I'm 9 years old. I just thought I'd like to see what a girl looks like below the waist, without any clothes on. You get them from adults. I don't know if I mentioned this in that particular episode, but when I was a kid, I was like probably 12, 13 years old, and I was going to junior high in Massachusetts. I got some program where I could sweep instead of going to class. I could just sweep the place and be a little janitor's assistant. There was a bunch of us. There's probably like 6 of us. And we go down to the boiler room to meet the old dude who was the janitor. He was sort of just kind of out of it the whole time. And I remember showing up, and these kids had been doing this for a long time, and there was just this ritual. Dixie cups, those little tiny cups you're supposed to drink and throw away. And he'd line them all up, and he'd pour us all a little shot of Jack. And we'd fucking pound this stuff and get a little tipsy, and then you're sweeping the school, and you're just chilling. You're a little high. You're like, oh man, this makes it so much better. Anything else you want me to do? I got those cups. I never told on the dude. None of the other kids told on the guy. He didn't get fired. I knew that dude because I kept coming in really early to set this thing up for class because we had some fluoride, thing that they were getting us to brush our teeth right when we got to school. It was something Colgate was putting on. But I'd always have the janitor let me in because it was really, he never touched me. He never paid any attention to me. The guy was like 10 sheets to his dementia. I don't know. He just kind of was a zombie guy. All right, I lived. All right. Yeah, we dumpster dived in my apartment complex as a kid, found X-rated, magazines. We lived. Okay. We figured out how the body works a little bit. If someone has experienced this for real, they can keep their story straight. They have emotional scars due to these situations occurring. I can completely understand why they might watch the documentary and remember things completely different. Insert things that didn't exist in the documentary to further suffer their own past. I get that. I respect that. But the problem is that we have a guy who died in 2009 being utterly crucified 10 years later by people that can't seem to keep their story straight, by 2 individuals who have severe financial problems, by 2 people that were probably to this day mourning the loss of their friend and having animosity because they weren't kept as the ultimate favorite until the very end. It could be, and it probably is true that Michael hung out with these kids. They had VIP treatment. I mean, my God, these kids toured with him individually in different camps. That part is factually proven by photographs and movies of them dancing on stage and hanging out with him. All right. And then at the end, 10 years goes by, all the promises of easy, fast success for one of the guys didn't occur, thinking that somehow you were going to just know Kung Fu. I'm going to say that you're going to be the next Steven Spielberg, and without trying very hard, it doesn't happen. Okay, well, whose fault is it that? Is it that happened? Is it Michael's fault? No. What did Michael do? Michael found his talent, rehearsed, busted his ass and became famous. You know, his father and his brothers being the shoulders that he stood on. You know, other amazing musicians, etc., etc. I can see where they could be ending their life with animosity towards Michael. I mean, I can see that be the possibility. One of the guys made a good point about the rings. One of the most emotional parts about the documentary is that James Safechuck said that there was a mock wedding when he was 9 years old, and there was a wedding ring given to him by Michael, and he brings this little box out. And this is when his whole apartment or his house or whatever changes complete decor. The chairs he had behind him turned into a big sofa. The painting was still on the wall, but it was definitely a different setup. The chair he was sitting in changed. And that's not a sin, you know. It could be that he remembered this or decided to reveal this or what have you. Maybe the documentary filmmakers, if this is all true, simply said, we need something else. You know, you told us about the rings. Are you willing to talk about the rings? And as he's pulling these rings out, his hands are shaking intensely. Well, they could be shaking for two different reasons. One, he's telling the truth. Two, he's telling a lie. And it's an outrageous lie if it's a lie, right? But the dudes were looking at the rings going, those don't look like baby rings. This kid's supposedly a minor, and he's got these rings. But these rings look like it could fit on an average size adult. Now, I don't have any opinion there because I don't remember. They did, I mean, in my memory, it kind of looks a little bit big. I can see the rings in my head. I can't remember the ring gauge. I don't know. He kind of slipped one over one of his fingers. I don't think it was able to go past his knuckle. So I don't know. Just one of those things. The woman who does body language, she took one of Michael's, I guess you might call it a deposition, an interview, something like that. He had his attorney in the room, and he's being interviewed by one of the, I guess, potential prosecution attorneys or something. And she read his body language and was picking him apart, saying that he was sort of hiding something, that, you know, this, that, and the other thing. But one of the documentaries I watched tonight, one of the debunking documentaries, had the extended version of the actual interview when he started speaking fluently about, you know, potential interview questions and a bunch of other stuff. And when you watch the second half of the interview with him, he loses a lot of his insecurities. Here's what I think that I think the fans of Michael maybe see this instantaneously, and I think those that want to throw him under the bus don't see, potentially, is that we don't insert ourselves into his shoes and say, okay, what is empathy? Empathy is feeling what another person feels. It's an extremely important process when you're trying to read what's going on in the world. Where do you put your sympathies? Where do you put your resources? Where do you put your dedication, etc., etc.? Well, imagine, you know, you're a little strange. As his nephew said, if they had a birthday party, Michael would interview them about the birthday party and say, well, what was it like? Interesting. Who would ask that question besides someone who missed their childhood and completely doesn't know what that situation is like? I think one of his younger brothers was at his funeral and said, you know, when they came home from school, they would try to get something to eat, run to the TV, and they like to watch the Three Stooges. And the game was they tried to watch as much TV as possible before they got the phone call that they had to go to the studio to rehearse, to record, to get back on track with the career. Now, can you imagine that? I remember coming home. I was a kid that came home to an empty house. I would let myself into the house. So this is like 7, 8 years old, both those years. And I would let myself in. I'd get myself some food, and I'd sit down in front of Tom and Jerry and the whole gang and watch cartoons until my parents came home a couple hours later. No babysitter, no nothing. I got my world. I could own the house. I could play music loud if I wanted to. I could play the Atari 2600 if I wanted to. I could go draw if I wanted to. I could walk over to my grandmother's if I wanted to. Hang out with my friends. I could drag my motorcycle out, pop the garage door, kickstart that baby, and go ride for 2 hours. Nobody was supervising me. All right. Well, Michael didn't have that lifestyle. And I can't imagine having all my childhood filled with business. As much as it might have been fame and all that kind of stuff, you still don't have your childhood, so you're a little whacked in the head. Now, again, my only critique that, keeps a little bit of my, thread in the sweater pulled open is this holding hands with the boys. And, there was a claim by one of the mothers that said that he tried to make sure that the mother made sure that the son would hold his hand. I remember my daughter. We had a strict policy when you crossed the street. You had to hold my hand. And it wasn't necessarily this bonding thing between, father and daughter. It was, if there's a car coming, something crazy happens, I got the ability to yank you out of the way, to take the hit instead of you getting the hit, right? My kid always respected that. But she wanted her independence. It was amazing. She didn't want to hold my hand after a certain point. And it wasn't any offense that I needed to take. It was just she was gaining her independence. She wanted to be able to cross the street without being supervised. Okay. I don't know why he holds kids' hands, like incessantly. There's tons of video of him in Neverland being filmed holding these kids' hands, all these shots of things. Now, maybe if he's getting out of a car and there's a crazy mob outside, I understand he's trying to make sure, just like me with my daughter, hey, I'm going to grab your hand because we're not going to lose you in this crowd. They'll eat you alive. You could die. I could see him having that opinion. But Neverland, you're completely safe. You own the place. Ain't no one touching kids in that place. It's a controlled environment. Now, one thing I tried to do, and I think I can say for all the footage that I've seen, and there's thousands of hours out there, so I haven't seen it all. My concern, which is why I paid attention the first time I watched the show, which is why when a friend disagreed with me that this was the case, I got frustrated and watched it again and confirmed I wasn't crazy, was that if Wade and James got together with the same attorney, which is what occurred, and they simply sync their stories. Because see, Wade can go first, right? Wade can go first, make up anything he wants. He could duplicate someone else's court filing to make it seem legit. One of the kids, which was not either one of these kids, I forgot this kid's name. I don't think it was the Jordan Chandler kid. But like a second kid did an interview and on the camera, which they put the documentary where the kid was talking about the things they did between the two of them. Michael and this kid, again, I don't want to say that, I know for a fact that any of this didn't or didn't happen. I wasn't there. I don't know. But you could easily harvest everything that had ever been said. If everything's been filed into discovery, it's a matter of public record or what have you. You sync your story to add legitimacy to it. But if these two guys got together and sync their stories, then this evidence lacking it'd be about an hour and a half of the second show, Leaving Neverland, the part 2, it would seem like, because the two of them are saying the same exact thing and very graphic things, that this has to be true. I fell for that too, without thinking it through, without thinking it like maybe these kids sync their stories. I don't know if they did or didn't. Last thing I want to do is personally punch out of this life having given someone a free pass that did do all these things. What was really interesting too is there's a channel on YouTube called I Am Not Norm or something like that. It's a channel dedicated to Norm Macdonald, the comedian who was on Saturday Night Live, who ended up getting the news gig. And he incessantly accused Michael Jackson of being a pedophile over and over. There's a whole compilation reel of him doing this in the 90s. I mean, it was savage. And in fact, it went into the 2000s, I believe, because when he started having his children, Norm was making jokes about Michael having sex with his own kids. So that could reveal two things. One, Norm's got some massive data drop that no one else has, including the sheriffs that, detain Michael and search his estate. Or it's sort of a deep state takedown. And it's not that it's not organic from Norm Macdonald, like our daddy's getting a paycheck from some deep state organization. It's just it's allowed to go on national television because there's this goal of knocking him out of the picture. I remember when Michael Jackson got the rights to Beatles, the whole Beatles, or half the Beatles collection, or something like that, a big chunk of the Beatles collection. I remember people being racially upset about that. Just in passing. None of my close friends, but just people that I heard talk about it, and it was like, oh, that's interesting. White guys can own all the black music, but once a black guy owns some of the white music, woohoo, big problem. Hey, don't put it up for sale if you don't want someone to buy it. That's my advice. But now let's dive back in, just to be sort of fair with this whole thing. Rewatching the documentary, my big question that remains, again, is the reaction that you see from at least some of the relatives. Now, again, unfortunately for the Safechucks, because they have such a financial problem, potentially. I mean, this woman was in the house. She looked very well dressed. The house looked great from the couple angles that they shot it from. You didn't get the sense that they had any financial issues. But it would seem that people diving into Wade's personal life, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody necessarily, that they do have some serious financial problems. I don't know personally, just repeating accusations from other people, supposedly evidence other people have uncovered. So let's subtract out of the equation at least Safechuck's mom. She may be telling the truth. But there's a story about Wade coming out to his brother because his brother said that his wife, they're outside, to set the scene, they're outside. It's Wade, his wife, and his brother. And they're at a eating area where there's a bunch of food trucks. And I guess they've ordered their food, but the brother came up to Wade and said, my wife had a dream last night that you confessed that Michael Jackson actually touched you. And this is supposedly the golden moment where Wade finally just said, it's true. And his brother tells the story. And because his brother was sort of, I wouldn't say he was estranged from the family, but he was more on the father's side until the father passed away. And it was literally when the brother left Australia to join his family in LA that his father went into his house and hung himself. I mean, it's just brutal. It's the brutal fact about what happened. And, of course, his brother's devastated because it kind of, how could you not feel that you're sort of responsible for that action, regardless if your father had mental issues or not? It's a huge deal. I have all the empathy and the sympathy in the world for the family experiencing that because it did occur. But it's his reaction, and it's his wife's reaction, Wade's wife, that seems like the most legitimate filming of people that have heard something that is just horrific. Because as it's portrayed in the documentary, Wade had told them up to that point that he never got touched. And then all of a sudden he's flipping his story. And of course they're confiding in Wade to tell them the truth because they're loved ones. They're the closest people in his life, including his mom, right? So if this is a hoax, and Wade and James are simply trying to gain financial security later in life, and of course there was this part of one of these documentaries. There's an email or a message or something that Wade has that has been validated as Wade left this message and he wrote these words down, that he said that he was going to get his prior to this whole thing coming out. And this was something presented to Brandy Jackson, right? The niece who dated Wade for 10 years. And so she said this looked really suspect. It doesn't seem like it's someone saying, well, I was molested and I am going to get mine. I'm going to get payback for this. I'm no longer going to go through the PTSD that was created by this event. That would have been a more legit statement to make. So the question is, did these two gentlemen collude through their attorney for this $1 billion case? And again, the number I saw was 1.62. It kept ratcheting up as they added their own, added the two of them together. But I've heard like 3 different numbers tonight, but it's always over $1 billion. Again, the case was thrown out. But did Wade lie to his brother? Did Wade lie to his wife and thus to his mother? Creating what looked like extremely legitimate trauma. Because his brother thought this whole Michael Jackson obsession was already overboard. That it had damaged their family. It resulted in a divorce and potentially, really, technically, in his father feeling so isolated with his other bipolar conditions that he hung himself. I don't know about you. If someone is lying to their family members like that and their family members aren't in on this thing, I can only tell you I wouldn't stand in front of Wade's brother and accuse him of that. He'd probably kick my ass 10 ways to Sunday. Then that's pretty damn devious, wouldn't you say? If you're someone who's a profiler and you build profiles on people's behaviors, okay, what you would have to do in order to tell such a gigantic lie to your family, to get them to go along with this and to seem very genuine in a documentary. My God. Yeah, I don't know how the families process all of these other debunking facts. Do they simply say, well, they're just seeing what they want to see. This really did occur. Or everyone could benefit from it financially. That's the tough thing. So there's a motive. You could establish a motive to say, well, I don't know about Wade giving his brother money. I suppose if you had hundreds of millions of dollars because this $1 billion plus lawsuit maybe settles down to like an $800 million settlement, couldn't you give your brother $10 million? And so potentially we're saying that if they're in on it, they're being bought off. They've all agreed to do this. They both seem to claim the same exact epiphany. They said that when they had their children, this is when it really hit them of what happened to them when they were older. And when his wife, Wade's wife, names I can't remember, she was saying, I needed to find out if my husband had tendencies. Both wives actually said this. Do you have tendencies towards our child? Both of them had sons. Do you have a tendency towards our child to touch them because you were touched? And of course they're like, absolutely not, no way. Now if they weren't touched, it'd be very easy to say, no, absolutely not, because there's nothing that ever happened to you in the first place. Now here's where we're going to close this thing off. This Leaving Neverland special, this 2-part, 4-hour thing that HBO put out there, is resulting in Michael Jackson's catalog being turned off in certain radio stations. The damage isn't conclusive yet because they're still deciding what to do. More stations could potentially pull him off the airwaves, and it could continue to cascade into damages that would be worth billions of dollars. What if iTunes and Google Play and every place that sold Michael Jackson music simply said, we can't sell his music anymore? Regardless if albums were made before any of this ever was even accused of existing. Like I said, we're talking about at least getting to Thriller before any of those accusations were even rumored to have occurred. So you could keep all the Jackson 5 stuff off the wall and Thriller. But around, I don't remember if the album's called Bad or I'm Bad, but it's the Bad series. Disney hired Michael Jackson to do the Captain EO thing directed by George Lucas. Are they going to pull that? It goes, I think it's Guardians of the Galaxy right now, where that show used to exist in Disneyland, but maybe it's still playing somewhere in the world. So it's a brilliant piece. They brought it back, and I was so happy because they got rid of Captain EO. They brought it back. It's just fantastic. It's great George Lucas work. It's phenomenal. Michael Jackson, you get to see Michael Jackson act in 3D, and he was a fabulous actor, But now, if this is all easily penetrated by all these debunking videos, well, imagine the power of a family with billions coming in every year. You hire the best law firm in the world, maybe 2 or 3, but at least one. And you take all these inconsistencies from the documentary and you countersue. You countersue so hard that HBO is owned by the Jackson family now. You countersue the Robson family, the Safechuck family, the attorneys that supported them, anyone who's remotely responsible for diminishing the character and the franchise value of Michael Jackson. Wouldn't that be a logical next step? Now, I've read articles that said before this thing released that they did threaten HBO, I almost said Hollywood, HBO with lawsuits if they release this thing. Okay, I've been around those scenarios before on my end of the game, and I know that they do incredible due diligence with their law firms to say, well, how could they come after us? And if we're lying, we know what lies we told. So is there some indemnity clause where they go, well, it's really going to fall back on the Robson family and the Safechuck family because they're the ones in the video making the accusations. We're just filming it. We're framing the evidence against Michael Jackson. Are they guilty for omitting all the things that I mentioned? And the countless things I didn't mention that the other videos seem to talk about. It's going to be an interesting 2019 in regards to this case. So I'm making this special report with an overwhelming bias for Michael Jackson's potential innocence because the other one is overwhelmingly more in favor of the documentary. But I did, use the allegation allegedly in the first special because I realized, well, these are allegations. They haven't gone through a court of law. In a court of law, you can't change your story over and over and over again. You can't make claims about riding on a train that doesn't exist. You can't make claims about staying with Michael Jackson while your family goes to the Grand Canyon when you actually did go to the Grand Canyon. If Brandy Jackson was brought into this new trial, let's just say they have a new trial and they're like going to sue the crap out of all these people. Well, imagine a jury listening to that story. Oh, you dated his niece for 10 years? I mean, obviously you didn't romantically date her when she was a minor and you were a minor, but eventually when you guys cross that threshold where I guess you can be intimate with each other and no one's going to say anything. I mean, if they met when he was 9 or 7, I guess you could say, I'm not sure when the relationship took place, but where it started. She said 10 years. So it could have been she was 17, she was 19 when it ended. I think he said it was 19 when it ended, but I could have that wrong. Wouldn't that change people's opinions about this whole molestation thing? Again, if a guy's a predator and a pedophile and he wants you all to himself, why would he hook you up? Why would Michael just say, I couldn't set up the thing. She's got to go to school. She's got other things. She's got a boyfriend or whatever. You just make up whatever excuse you can to a little kid. And he has his heart broken for maybe a week or two. And then he realizes, I'm in Neverland and I don't care. Michael definitely thought for the last several years of his life that they were going to try to kill him. He refused to go to a hospital because he thought the hospital would try to kill him. Dick Gregory was a family friend. Dick Gregory is an extremely interesting dude. He has been used to disseminate things like the footage of Kennedy being shot in his car back in 63. He's one of the first black comedians to be on television on the Playboy channel because Hugh Hefner wanted to show that the world has multiple colors, and when the network said, we won't put that guy on TV, he said, well, screw you can't have my show. So they're going, okay, let him on TV. I've seen Dick talk about a lot of amazing things. The artist known as Prince sought out lots of evidence from Dick Gregory, and I will say that Dick is very alive and lucid and seems to have a lot of interesting resources. There was a point when the trial concluded, literally the last day when he was acquitted. Dick came over to visit Michael at the court, followed him home, realized he looked very unhealthy. He said that Michael told him, he goes, they're trying to kill me. He says, well, dude, when's the last time you've eaten? He says, they're going to poison me. He says, well, when's the last time you drank water? He says, they're going to poison me. He says, well, look, let's get in a car and go to the hospital. He said, no, they're going to kill me. He said, okay, fine. We're going to drive to San Francisco and we're going to pull into a hospital randomly. They won't know you're coming. And so he agreed to that, and they took him to San Francisco, and I guess before they got quite into the city limits or whatever, Dick said that they finally found a hospital, pulled him in there, got him on an IV, and he was on an IV for, like 12 hours or something like that. And the doctors came to Dick and said, look, if you hadn't brought him in here, he would have died in a couple days. He was so dehydrated. He was at literally a life-threatening level. So when we see Michael really emaciated at the court, especially when he's leaving, he's walking real slow and Joe's there and all the bodyguards are there lifting him out. According to Dick, that was a very, very real thing. Well, like I said before, just in closing here, again, I think there's substantial evidence that there was some profiteering with his death. I don't believe for an instant that Michael would grab, wasn't it Propanol? I think that's the name of the drug. Whatever it was he was using to sleep, that he would just randomly inject himself with some of that stuff. Oh, the doctor said I only need, 20 cc's and I'm just going to give myself 50 because, I just feel like really getting to bed tonight. I just don't buy that. And maybe some of you who might see this and you can get to the end of this, again, when I was watching live news the day that Michael Jackson died, and for the next couple days, they did say that the surveillance footage of his house, the external cameras to the house he was renting, had at least 2 individuals running away from the window to Michael Jackson's room, that they had that on video, and the LAPD lost the video. Maybe you guys remember that. Maybe it's a Mandela effect. I sure as hell would not have made that up. Give me a break. Who the hell would make something like that up? Not me. So they take him down. Try to take him down in 2 cases. He wins. In the end, they kill him. And 10 years later, there's this hit piece on him that is unbelievable. For me, the only 2 people that could really be lying on camera from a likelihood standpoint would be Wade and James, if they are lying at all. All right. I hate to accuse 2 people that are telling the truth that they're lying. That would be a big faux pas on my part. But then again, I need their stories to not change and not contradict well-known facts about reality. I do believe that, for now, without further evidence, that the family members are simply being told this, and it's going to be another secret that's kept for the rest of their lives. Now, do I think that these guys could lie like this and keep the secret from their loved ones forever? No. I don't think they can go to their grave lying about Michael Jackson in this realm. So either the unthinkable is that, we always talk about the moon missions on this show. You're talking about 2 mothers, a sister, a brother, and 2 wives, all faking this on camera and all being able to withdraw from their insides this amazing emotional reaction. Now, if these guys are being accused of things that they never said, then they need to defend the other side of the game. Like, did you go to the Grand Canyon or not? Did you ride on a train when it didn't exist? Did you get these things wrong? Why are you getting these things wrong? I guess they can defend themselves. They should. If you never hear from these guys again, and that stuff is true, then we probably can conclude this whole thing is a fabrication. I know we all love Michael Jackson. I love his music. I don't know the guy, never knew the guy, was never close to the guy, and so I can't claim anything else other than just liking the byproduct of his life. And that could be deceiving, there's plenty of people that have created amazing things that you admire, but they turn out to be real jerks in life. Yeah, it happens. It does. I've seen enough questionable behavior from these gentlemen and financial peril in both families that, and lawsuits for billions of dollars, which, their attorney should have said, what law firm is going to take on this multi-billion-dollar lawsuit, present it to a court, and not know that there's a statute of limitations for that? I've seen an attorney once because I got injured because of something that, it was someone shipped something to my house and they didn't have the proper equipment to get it off the truck, and I helped lift this thing off the truck, and it crushed one of my vertebrae in my back. I'm better now, but it took, a couple of years to get over that. I went and saw an attorney, and the guy says, well, you've got, I think he told me like I had 4 years, 2 to 4 years. He said, after 2, it's going to look bad. You're not saying anything. He sent me off to some, physical therapy place, and it really worked. And so I just went on with my life, but my attorney knew what was capable of being charged in a court of law. And you mean to tell me these guys with billion-dollar appetites don't know the law? What the hell are they doing putting this case against the Jackson family? Do they think the family was just going to overlook the law and just pay them off? The idea was to say, in my opinion, the only strategy that could possibly be asserted would be, well, we know there's a statute of limitations against this case, but we're threatening you. We're going to collude together, whether we're telling the truth or not. We're going to combine our efforts, and we're going to accuse your number one asset, Michael, of doing this to us, and it's going to impact you. And it's going to be our word against your word. And because I can't even take it into court, meaning these two guys, you're going to have to fight off my accusations. If I were the Jackson family and these other inconsistencies are true, that they are actually lying, I would sue them. I would sue them to the point where their current financial problems will pale in comparison to what's going to happen. There's damages. There's damages going on right now. Anyway, I'm starting to loop on myself. So for those of you who felt like I misrepresented the counterfacts, well, it's a process. This thing is brand new. This thing is fresh. Now, some of you have been following this case since the first TV appearance by Wade back in, I think, 2013, and you think this is all old news. Well, that's great. I didn't see that stuff. I don't obsess on people. I could think that someone was like I could think Rod Serling is the best TV writer to ever live, but it would be a freak of nature that I would go, well, let me look up when he was born and who his parents are and who his kids are. I don't do that. I just have no interest in that. I just am interested in the byproduct. Now, sometimes I want to know how and why someone ticks. I might dig a little bit. What's that going to do for me? I'm not them. I didn't have their experiences in life, so it's not of any real value to me. Method is different. How did you learn how to write? How did you write? That's a little bit different. But I never wanted to be Michael Jackson as an artist. I just wanted to listen to his stuff. I was praying he would always come out with a new tune. And he did, until the end. Anyway, I know you feel me. For those of you who have not been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. There's audio and video, a locked Facebook group, a Twitter account, and a Patreon page. For those of you who are not used to the show, it doesn't cover anything like this, usually. This is factoid stuff about real people in the real world, and I seldom really get this deep into that kind of thing. So You may or may not have any interest in the rest of the show. But thanks for stopping by. If you can hear the sound of my voice and you've never seen me before, I appreciate it. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.